Okay, this is going to go over LP4 Project Communications Management. Even though this was based off of information technology project management, it really does apply to all forms of project management. So I've tried to remove all references to information technology. So for learning objectives, it's to understand the importance of good communications on projects and the need to develop soft skills, especially for project managers and their teams. There'll be a review of the key concepts related to communications. We'll be explaining the elements of planning project communications and how to create a communications management plan. We'll also review how to describe how to manage communications, including communication technologies, media, and performance reporting. We'll be discussing the methods for controlling communications to ensure that information needs are met through the life of the project, and list various methods for improving project communications, such as running effective meetings, using various technologies effectively, and using templates. We'll be describing how software can help enhance project communications management. And the importance of good communication in project management. The greatest threat to many projects is a failure to communicate. If you don't say anything, you can't communicate anything, and therefore your entire team and stakeholders have no clue what's going on. So our culture does not portray many professionals as being good communicators. A lot of us struggle in face-to-face verbal communication, but a lot of us also struggle in written communication, and sometimes that communication, especially with today's technology, can actually be in email communication, or it can even be, a lot of companies are even using text communication, and that can be really dangerous, especially if you don't communicate well and you're texting and you're trying to do net speak and shortcut. It could just be a big problem. So research will show that professionals must be able to communicate effectively to succeed in their positions. Strong verbal and non-technical skills are a key factor in career advancement for professionals. A 2014 study on the importance of non-technical skills. Most important non-technical skills include problem solving, teamwork, and listening skills. And some organizations will hire individuals with minimal technical skills as long as they demonstrate solid soft and business skills. And that can actually end up being a hindrance too, because a lot of the project management responsibilities out there in today's day require, some of them require advanced technical skills. So in the project communications management processes, the planning communications management is determining the information and communications needs of the stakeholders. In managing communications, we are creating, distributing, storing, retrieving, and disposing of project communications based on the communications management plan. We're also controlling communications, where we're monitor and control project communications to ensure that stakeholder communications needs are met. If the stakeholders don't understand what we're doing and it looks like we're going off track of what they initially thought and what they wanted, that could be a huge communication error. I've learned over the years in project management and in graphic design and website design, almost 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, when somebody comes to you as a stakeholder and they have an idea of what they plan to, this project that or this idea they have, I can guarantee almost every single time what is in their head does not come out on paper. And when you create an entire plan based on what they're telling you, it ends up being nothing like what they're imagining. And so we have to be adaptable. And I use that word a lot because when we're dealing with people, people will have that's a failure to communicate as well, when the stakeholders can't get their idea across. And so sometimes you have to kind of get into their head and think like they may think, so that you can actually approach the project correctly. Because I can guarantee it's not going to be what they initially think. Here's an image for project communications management summary. And we have on here, we've got planning. There's a process which we plan communications management, the outputs, communications management plan, project document update. Then we have executing the project, where there's a process and output here as well. The process is managed communications. Your output are your project communications, your project documents updates, project management plan updates, and organizational process assets updates. And then after that one, we have monitoring and controlling throughout the project, where the process here is control communications, and then your output is your work performance information, your change requests, project document updates, and organizational process assets updates. And then hopefully you'll reach the project start, all the way to the project finish, and hopefully you'll get there on time and on budget, if not under budget. Hopefully you won't go over budget. That seems to be a problem when you're not controlling and communicating correctly with your stakeholders. So that's very important that we try to finish on time, if not before time, and hopefully under budget. The keys to good communication. We have project managers say they spend as much as 90% of their time communicating. There needs to be a need to focus on the group and individual communication needs, and use formal and informal methods for communicating. There's times when you'll need to use industry and technical wording so that you meet the project scope and the information. Other times you'll just have informal communication where, maybe it's off the record, where you could just go to the stakeholder or to your team and say, hey, look, what the heck's going on? So you have different types of communication among the team and among your entire stakeholders. You also you distribute important information in an effective and timely manner. Hopefully you'll set the stage for communicating bad news. Nobody wants to hear bad news, but sometimes it happens, especially if there's environmental issues that will prevent, or technical issues where software and technology goes down and then you can't do anything. Sometimes you have bad news, and you have to be able to communicate that in a professional manner. And then we also want to determine the number of communication channels. Well, what type of channels are you using? What methods are you using to communicate? Like I mentioned earlier, are you using email, telephone? Are you using like conference calling? Are you texting sometimes with your stakeholders or even within your team? A lot of teams have daily scrums where they just get together and go over the project information quickly. And so there's just like different ways. And a lot of the project management software that's on the market allows you to incorporate these different ways of communicating. So it can be pretty helpful. Now, in understanding the group and individual communication needs, people are not interchangeable parts. And the example they give here is from a book that's titled by Brooks, it's called The Mythical Man Moth. You cannot assume that a task originally scheduled to take 2 months of one person's time can be done in 1 month by 2 people. So you can't change it. If it's going to be a 2-month project, it's going to be a 2-month project. Just because you add additional people doesn't mean that you'll necessarily get it done quickly, because everything does have a timeline, And sometimes you have development factors in there. And the example they give here is that 9 women cannot produce a baby in 1 month. It takes 1 woman 9 months, technically, to have a baby. Yes, that can alter, but just for technical purposes, that's the example they give. The importance of face-to-face communication, the research that they had said that in a face-to-face interaction, that 58% of communication is through body language. Body language, if you are sitting face-to-face in a meeting and you have your arms crossed, if you even cross your legs, those are body language aspects that, mannerisms that tell people you're closed off from them. And so when you sit there with your arms crossed, even if it's on top of a table, you're not presenting yourself openly, and some people can take that, a lot of people can take that as a very bad, communication skill. 35% of communication is through the use, how words are said. And here we need to be careful on the way that we use our words. And again, depending on the stakeholders involved. And for example, if you have a team where, say if you're just looking at your internal team working on a project, and you have maybe a department manager, maybe you have a graphic designer, you have a website designer or developer, maybe you'll have a sales representative in the meeting. So you have people from different departments. You're not going to use the same wording to each of those people to project the project to them. The same terminology that you use for a salesperson may mean nothing to the graphic designer. The graphic designer is looking at the visual representation of the project, just like the website designer, the developer, they are also looking at the visual representation of the project, but you're going to speak to them in different words and use different words to get across the same message. So as a project manager, you need to be able to relay that information to the different types of people. A sales representative, they're not going to care really, how long it takes the graphic designer to create something. To a sales representative, their goal is to get out there and sell a product, and they want the product to be done so that they can, go out there and make their sales quota or whatever, get their commission if they're on commission. And to them, they think, all right, well, so the graphic designer just has to create a logo or create, the product packaging, and the web designer has to just write the content on the page. They don't realize that a website designer has to, they may have to start investigating Google Analytics and incorporating all this other stuff. And so again, you need to know how to speak to each of the people on your team. And then it says that 7% of communication is through the content or words that are spoken. And again, that relates to what I just explained on the different types of people that you have internally. And then going externally, you still have to think about how you're going to communicate that final project to the consumer and to the stakeholders. And the consumer is one of your stakeholders, the community where the product is going to be released. All of that falls into the same scenario. So you need to pay attention to more than just the actual words that someone is saying. And sometimes people can't express themselves, and so it may take a little time to get that communication adjusted. A person's tone of voice and body language says a lot about he or she really feels. So when you're presenting a project, going over your timeline, again, if the people you're presenting to are sitting there on their mobile phones and texting, or if they keep getting up to go to the bathroom, or, just all these different types of scenarios that you can, go over, that, to the presenter, that ends up being a problem because you're not capturing their attention, And so when the time comes, they don't have a clue about what's going on the project. Personal preferences affect communication needs. Introverts like more private communications, while extroverts like to discuss things in public. So when you're in a meeting with a team, you're going to have this mix of people, and you need to understand how to relate to them. I know as my role as a professor, and myself, I'm a visual learner. I prefer to see presentations and imagery. It helps me to connect the information to what I'm supposed to be doing. Sometimes I need to see examples of stuff so that I can understand what is expected. If I have nothing to go by, I pretty much freeze up. And so that aspect of me is, part of the extrovert, whereas you have other people that maybe they just prefer an email of instructions, that they don't really want to talk it out. And so you have to kind of adapt there and incorporate both. So you're appeasing both types of personalities. And intuitive people like to understand the big picture, while sensing people need step-by-step details. I know I flip-flop back and forth on this particular topic. For me, when, if I go back to my college days and looking at a course assignment, and I still do that as a professor, I go and I look at the information, and sometimes I'll freak out, and then I have to go back and look at it step by step. But first I need to see the big picture, and then I go back and then I reevaluate it. And then you do the same thing when you're in a project, because you want to present your entire project timeline to your team and the stakeholders, and you just keep moving, and then you move forward from there. So we go on, it says thinkers want to know the logic behind the decisions being made, while feeling people want to know how something affects them personally. Judging people are driven to meet deadlines, while perceiving people need more help in developing and following plans. So this kind of may delay a meeting at times, and hopefully you can get everybody back on the same page. Now, encouraging more face-to-face interactions. So when you have these face-to-face interactions in meetings, you want them to be short. Frequent meetings are often very effective in the project. You don't want to waste everyone's time, because very long meetings can end up being drawn out to the point where you end up losing focus. And then if people aren't taking notes, or if there's no follow-up meeting notes, they don't understand, or they may have forgotten. Stand-up meetings, which are really popular in the agile environment and project management, this is where it forces people to focus, on what they really need to communicate. And technically, on an agile stand-up meeting, a lot of teams will stand up in a circle, and they just kind of go around the circle, and each person explains what they're doing on the project, where they are in the project, if they need something from somebody else on the team, and then they just kind of, move along from there. And some companies have policies preventing the use of email between certain hours or even entire days of the week. And I know myself, as an instructor, we have like a 24-hour turnaround time to respond to students, and I hardly ever, never, I should say, I never take that long to respond to a student. And I'm always trying to stay on. I don't like my email piling up on me. I see it come in, I want to respond to it, but what ends up happening is that you end up spending too much time in one area, and then other areas can suffer. So the same thing happens on a project, where you need to have like a dedicated time where you'll go and you'll review your emails. There's some companies where they'll tell the team to come in, and they'll say, okay, you can open your email, read through your email, but don't respond to anybody. But at least you have an idea what's going on, so you can think about the emails that you received. And then later on, they'll have the team go back and start responding to the emails. For me, I find that method difficult, but again, some teams work that way, and so you have to decide which way is the best way to communicate, especially if you have projects where you have team members that might not be located in your particular area and everything is done virtually and you need to incorporate different time zones. These are a lot of different factors where your communication and set times will come in so that everybody can at least interact with each other in a timely manner. Distributing information in an effective and timely manner. Do not bury crucial information. Do not be afraid to report bad information. Oral communication via meetings and informal talks helps bring important information, good and bad, out into the open. Other communication considerations. Rarely does the receiver interpret a message exactly as the sender intended. And as an instructor, I do find that a lot and again, when you're writing information, written information does not have the same connotation and the same tone as you may speak. And sometimes when you write things and you're trying to, and I know for me, when I'm trying to emphasize a certain area, I will try to highlight in red, or I'll bold it or make it a different color to bring attention to it, to show importance. And here, when you're looking at messages, one thing you need to make sure that you very rarely use and that you try to avoid is using all caps, because we know in written forms of communication, when we use all caps in our letters, our words, that it comes across as shouting at the other person. And so we avoid that as much as possible. Also, we need to consider the geographic location, as I mentioned, and the cultural background affect the complexity of the project communications. There are different working hours to consider. There are language barriers to consider. There are different cultural norms. And these are all really important things that you need to consider, that you may be in the United States working on a project, but maybe your team or your stakeholders are in another country where there are 12-hour difference. And so you have to find a way to effectively communicate because of that geographic and cultural background difference. And you have to be careful on the language that's used, because you don't want to offend somebody in the way that you write something. When we're having a teleconference and people can hear your voice, or if it's a video conference and they can see your face, it's a little bit easier to read people, and you can see, oh, I think I just maybe offended that person, and so you can kind of adjust from there. But in written format, it ends up becoming quite difficult sometimes. And determining the number of communication channels. As the number of people involved increases, the complexity of communications increases, because there are more communication channels or pathways through which people can communicate. So again, as you increase your team, you just have this, I'll go to the next slide. So there's an example here. When you have two people, you have one communication channel, because we're talking and seeing each other face to face, back and forth. You can watch each other's reactions, so it's a one-on-one. But then if we move down to the next image, we see three people. Well, now you have three-way communication, and even if it's face-to-face or if it's over some video format or however the communication is being relayed, you have three different opinions, and so now you've added an additional way in which the conversation can go. And then if we look at the next image to the right, where you have four people, now they bring in 6 communication channels. And so what you see is you have all this back and forth. There's even a mathematical equation at the top where this is the number of communication channels equals n, and it's got n minus 1 in parentheses, so over 2. And so that's how they, and I'm not going to get into mathematics here, but that's technically how they figure, these communication channels. So if you may think, well, we've got 4 people, and so it's 4 communication channels, but it's not. It's actually 6, because you have the, person to person, 1 person to 3 people, and then you can crisscross that as it shows in the image. So, and again, these people can be from different geographic or cultural backgrounds and locations, and so the way that you effectively communicate makes a huge difference on how the project is going to move along, or if it's not going to move along correctly. In planning communications management, every project should include some type of communications management plan. The document that guides project communications. The communications management plan varies with the needs of the project, but some type of written plan should always be prepared. Because again, if you can create some type of an outline to review, anything you can do to help the team is what's going to make your project successful. For small projects, the communications management plan can be part of the team contract. For large projects, it should be a separate document. Communications management plan content. We have the stakeholder communication requirements. Information to be communicated, including format, content, and level of detail. Who will receive the information and who will produce it. The suggested methods or technologies for conveying the information. Frequency of communication, how often are you going to communicate to the team and then to the stakeholders, and for everyone that's involved. You may communicate with your team 2 or 3 times a week, but you may only communicate with your stakeholders maybe every other week or once a month, really just depending on how long the project is supposed to take. And so you just go according to that. There's escalation procedures for resolving issues. How are you going to handle when you have issues and problems come up? And you need to understand how to properly escalate that and make sure you take care of it quickly so it doesn't affect the entire project or stop the project from moving along. Revision procedures for updating the communications management plan. Again, you need to make sure that in your scope that everything is well defined and well written, because you will have a stakeholder, someone coming back and trying to make changes, and they need to understand at the very beginning that here's the scope of the plan, this is what we're going to do, and that if you come in and the stakeholder makes changes, they need to understand that when you start revising any procedures, that it could affect the project being completed on time. And so they need, that needs to be communicated effectively to the entire team, and you definitely make sure the team is on the same page and you don't have somebody in the team agreeing to something outside the scope and then you have to come back and fix that problem. And then we have a glossary of common terminology. So a lot of times, depending on the type of project, you may even share like, well, here's the terminology we're going to be using throughout the project, and provide like a little glossary of this is the term and this is what it means. So that way, if you have somebody coming in, they're not left out in the dark and not understanding. Some people may not understand what the scope is and what that term means. And so you want to, you just want to really communicate so that hopefully you can avoid questions or facing a problem later on down the road because somebody didn't really understand what that term meant and they did something completely different than what was required. And then here's a figure. This is a sample stakeholder analysis for project communications. So across the top, we have the stakeholders column, the document name, the document format, the contact person, and the due date. And a lot of this is put in a lot of the project management software, where your stakeholders may be, like they have pure customer management, customer business staff, customer technical staff, internal management, internal business and technical staff, training subcontractor, software subcontractor. And then, as the columns that follow show you, these are the names. Most of them are considered a monthly status report for most of them, except for like the training subcontractor. They have a training plan, because obviously they're developing a training plan for whatever the software or whatever project is being developed, on how they're going to train people that use that. And then the software contractor, they have this software implementation plan, which is going to define how the software is going to be used once it's complete. The document format, we've got hard copy to intranet, which is internal within the company, and then we have email format, and then in the contact person, obviously you'll list the people that are over those particular areas, and those are the ones that are considered the point of contact. And then you have your due date, and so this gives an actual image of who's responsible for what their method of contacting everyone on the team is going to be, how often they're going to be contacting everyone on the team throughout the project, and when you can expect to get their report, so that you know that everyone is progressing on time. So if somebody is not reporting, in this example, on the 1st of the month, and it's the 2nd of the month and there's no report, everybody knows they can go back to that person and say, hey, where's your report? We can't move forward because there is no report. And then according to this, we've got the training subcontractor, we've got a November 1st date, and then the software implementation is scheduled for June 1st, where they can start testing, because you're going to have a lot of testing going on, especially when you have software involved. And managing communications. Managing communications is a large part of a project manager's job. Getting project information to the right people at the right time and in a useful format is just as important as developing the information in the first place. Important considerations include the use of technology, the appropriate methods and media to use, and performance reporting. Using technology to enhance creation and distribution. Again, technology can facilitate the process of creating and distributing information when it's used properly. I cannot stress how many times I've seen project management software available to the team and it's not used correctly. Or you may have the graphic designers say, well, I don't really need that because I'm the creative person, and well, no, they do need it. Everybody needs to be using the same software, the same technology. Everyone needs to understand how to use it properly, because that's where the team will go to make sure that everybody is progressing on time. If certain team members decide that, well, they refuse to use the technology that's provided for them, well, how is the rest of the team going to know if everybody is moving along on time? They're not going to know that information. And so as a project manager, you need to make sure, like, this is what we're using, like it or not, this is how it's going to be. You need to move forward. And so it is important to select the appropriate communication method and media. Again, this is where you would define on, how you're going to communicate, like in the image that we saw previously. Is it going to be through email, through more? And that schedule we saw is actually in addition to, your weekly or 2 or 3 times a week meeting that you have with the team, and it really just depends on the amount of technical aspects that are involved. Or, for example, if you have a project that requires researching and applying for different licenses or different permits through government agencies, you have to allow time for all of that to be processed. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to go down to the county office and apply for a permit and expect to walk out that same day. Can it happen? Yeah, probably sometimes, but don't count on it. You know, they could turn around and tell you it's going to take a week or 3-4 weeks, however long they want to tell you, depending on what's involved. And then if depending on the type of project, if you're talking about a construction project, everybody needs to be on the same page on how the communication method is going to be relayed and what type of media are you going to be using. Is it going to be strictly that software media? Are you going to be using email? Are you going to be texting? But when you do these types of communication, you need to make sure that you're communicating what you're doing to the appropriate people. So maybe, for example, if your role is a construction manager on a project, you may not need to notify the graphic designer what's happening, but you may need to tell the website developer what's happening, because maybe the website developer is keeping the website up to date on how a construction project is going, and maybe they need to make an adjustment or just include that information. And then whoever may be running social media outlets would need to know certain information, or your public relations team. So it really just depends on who's on your team and the type of media that you'll end up using. Classifications for communication methods. There are interactive communication, where 2 or more people interact to exchange information through meetings, phone calls, video conferencing. These are most effective way to ensure a common understanding of the project. There is push communication. This is information is sent or pushed to recipients without their request via reports, emails, faxes, voicemails, other means. Ensures that the information is distributed, but does not ensure that it was received or understood. So if you send out a message and there is no like a read receipt or anything like that, you don't really get a guarantee that they actually got the message, that they read the message, that they understood it. They may not, they may not have opened it, whatever. So you need to kind of watch that. Now, a pull communication is where information is sent to the recipients at their request. And so they have asked you for it, stakeholders may have asked you, and so then you send it because they're literally pulling that in. They want that information coming to them. And so you'll send the information to the recipients because they've requested it. And again, you may update the websites, the bulletin boards, an e-learning plan, knowledge repositories like blogs and other means, just depending on what you're using to communicate. And again, it really depends on the type of project and the method of communication, what you're going to be using, at least on the technology standpoint. Since most everything these days involves technology, you're going to need to probably incorporate a lot of that. Here's another image. This table 10.2 is a media choice table that was included, and it has a key at the top where 1 is excellent, 2 is adequate, 3 is inappropriate, and there's a list of. Now, if I were making this list as a project manager, I have a big pet peeve where I like to put things in an alphabetical order so that it's easier to find, and I think it's easier to read. This one is not, because it was already created. But in the media column, the very first one, where we have assessing commitment in the first line, it tells you the number 3 key they use, that it's inappropriate to use a hard copy. Telephone calls are adequate, voicemail is inappropriate, emails are inappropriate, a meeting is appropriate, and a website is inappropriate. So when you're assessing commitment, when you look at this key, it's telling you that a meeting is the preferable method to assess the commitment to the project. And if we look at, let's see here, making an iconic statement, which is about halfway down, it's very similar to assessing commitment, where if you're going to make an iconic statement, you want to do that in a meeting format. And so that's why they have excellent way of communicating that. You want to have everybody together in the meeting. You want to relay that you're making this iconic statement so everybody hears it. You see everyone's reaction. They're either for it or against it or undecided. If you send out an iconic statement in any of these other formats, voicemail and telephone call are marked as number 2, which says it's still adequate, so you can still do it. But again, through voicemail or telephone call, you're not going to see the reaction of the recipient of this iconic statement. They're going to be, maybe they'll be doing something else on their phone, so their full attention won't be on what you're saying. Voicemail, they're obviously listening to a recorded message. And so again, you need to, when you make these type of tables and how you're going to relay these messages, you need to think about what format that you're going to use when you're trying to communicate to the entire team and to the stakeholders. In reporting performance reporting keeps the stakeholders informed about how resources are being used to achieve project objectives. You have status reports where they describe where the project stands at a specific point in time. Hence, it's a status report. It's what is the status, and this is where you're communicating the status. A progress report is just that. It describes what the project team has accomplished during a certain period of time. So when you hit your milestones, when you're going through your timeline, and you are going through, you're letting your team know that this is how we're progressing. And if we go back to trying to get a county permit for something, for example, if you got the permit, or if you have an estimated time when you'll get this permit, a lot of these outside dates that you have no control over, or if it was a inclement weather issue, you need to relay that to your entire team so that they understand what the progress is, and maybe they can move ahead on something else, but a lot of times they probably can't, and then everybody has to sit there and wait. In forecast, this is where you predict future project status and progress based on the past information and trends. And so again, looking at a forecast, if you're in a project that, and it probably doesn't even really matter the type of project, because if you're using technology, and I think of the weather factor, the weather and inclement weather can affect, because we do so many things through the internet, it can affect how we're going to forecast projects, especially if the technology goes down. And so it may be hard to do this prediction. So there's a lot of these other factors that we need to kind of take in. You kind of think of a weather forecaster. Weather forecaster looks at all different types of weather models and tries to predict what's going to happen, but sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But a lot of times you may want to present a worst case scenario so that the team understands that, well, it may not happen, but it's possible it could. And so everybody needs to kind of be ready and adjust themselves accordingly, because again, you want to make sure that you're going to finish your project on time. If you go and look at an example of, if you're cooking a meal for your family, it's a project, and it's the same principle, and you're going to have your family members waiting on food if you're the one cooking it. You may have a spouse or family member, kids or whatever, asking, how long is it going to be before dinner's done? And so there, as the person cooking the meal, you're giving progress reports to your family and telling them that, well, I'm still preparing it, and it's still got to cook for 35 minutes, and you know, that's giving a progress report. And then the same with forecast. You're hoping that your meal will be done within the time that you're expecting it. But if you get sidetracked and you leave the meal in the oven for too long and it burns, it wasn't your intention that your meal was going to burn and you ruined the family dinner, because your prediction was that it was going to be done in 35 minutes after it cooks. Well, again, sometimes things happen. So when you apply these to your everyday life, you can see how these projects kind of work together and hopefully can relate to it a little bit easier. And controlling communications. The main goal of controlling communications is to ensure the optimal flow of information throughout the entire project life cycle. You want to make sure, and a lot of times when you're in a face-to-face meeting, even if you're in a video conference of some sort, whenever you have more than 2 people within a group, you're going to have some form of opposition. You're going to have something that takes it off track. Someone will start going down a different track, or maybe everyone comes into a meeting and starts talking about how bad the weather is, and the next thing you know, 20 minutes have gone by and everybody's been talking about the weather, and so the project manager has to be the one to pull it back in and making sure that this flow of information is on task and staying, in this set flow so that you can get through the project on time, especially if you're working in an agile environment when everything is just, go, 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 and you're doing your daily scrums or however often you're doing your scrum meetings, and you want to make sure that, everybody is on task, because those are meant to be quick. And so you're not in the days where you're sitting in a meeting for 3 hours really accomplishing not much, or maybe you're accomplishing something that could have been done in 15 minutes. And that's why they've developed these new types of meeting methods, so that you can get in, talk about the meeting, keep it on topic, and keep moving. And this is where a really good project manager knows how to control this communication to keep everybody on point. And so the project manager and the project team should use their various reporting systems, as we saw earlier, their expert judgment and meetings to assess how well communications are working. If problems exist, the project manager and the team need to take action, which often requires changes to the earlier processes of planning and managing project communications. Also, in controlling communications, it's often beneficial to have a facilitator from outside of the project team assess how well communications are working. And some instances, I think back to working with Florida's Turnpike, for example, and I worked in public information, and we would have these public patron communication boards, these are patron meetings, where we would have a select group of patrons within the community. It was normally about 5 people that just came in and volunteered their time, and we would have these meetings with the patron committee, talk to them about the roadway projects that were coming up, maybe inform them. Maybe we'd usually would rent a big room, like a ballroom, set up all these huge easels and make these huge billboard or these big posters with the diagrams of what's going to happen with the roadway projects. And then these team of 5 patrons would come in and they would look at the information. They'd get to talk to some of the construction project managers. They get to talk to us from public relations, and they would give their outside opinion because they're detached. They're connected as a stakeholder because they are patrons using the roadways that we're in the process of of constructing or creating new roads for them. And so this is where you use these outside people, these stakeholders, to come in and give their opinion, because sometimes you may be looking at things from such a technical aspect that you don't look at the outside factor and how it may affect the community. And so a lot of times in those instances, we would find out that if we were going to be doing road construction or putting in a new ramp or increasing the flow of traffic, where you're going to have a lot more vehicles on that particular area of the road, we would have to reevaluate and come back and say, all right, well, now we need to do a sound study, because now with the increase of traffic coming through that section of road, now the noise level of those people living in the community there are going to be affected, and also maybe the fumes from the vehicles could make people sick. So you end up having to do these environmental studies in addition to things that you may not have been planning. You have to do these noise studies that you may not have been planning to do, and then the result ends up that we ended up having to put in these huge concrete walls that you see along different roadways throughout the country. And those sound walls were purposely put in because of these outside patron committees, and sometimes you don't always have to have the outside factor, because if you've already done that particular type of a interaction with the patrons and they come in and give that, you can take that information and move forward in future projects. And so now you know that all future projects, you're going to have to do a noise study, you're going to have to do an environmental study, you're going to most likely have to, you know, build a concrete wall to help block the sound and the fumes from the neighborhood, so you protect the well-being of the people in that community. So there's a lot of different factors that come in controlling these communications. Suggestions for improving project communications. We want to develop better communication skills. We want to run effective meetings. We want to use email and other technologies effectively, and hopefully get everyone using them and not ignoring them. And we want to use templates for project communications. Also, in developing better communication skills, most companies will spend a lot of money on technical training for their employees, even when the employees might benefit more from communication training. Individual employees are also more likely to enroll voluntarily in classes to learn the latest technology than in classes that develop soft skills. As organizations become more global, they realize they must invest in ways to improve communication with people from different countries and cultures. And this is such an important factor. And it's also one that I try to teach to my marketing and business students as well, is that when you are, you know, in project management and marketing, I mean, there's project management and marketing, so many of these areas crisscross together and they work, you know, on the same scale. If you are a company, you have a product or a service, and you're going outside of your country, it's so important to do your research and investigate how the people in the countries are going to react to your product or service. You need to investigate and research the cultures of the people in those communities as well. Don't ever assume that an entire country is the same as far as demographics, because they're not, because every country is going to have a north, south, east, west, and a central area. And so each of those different, when you start breaking down those geographic locations on the different demographics of people, they're going to, you know, people that live in the south of a country aren't going to live the same as people living in the north. If you take, you know, if you look at the United States, for example, you know, I live in Central Florida. Here in Orlando, we have more hot days than we do cold days. And so our lifestyle is not going to be the same as somebody that lives in Minnesota, where they have a lot of snow and a lot of ice. And so you have to understand about the people that you're trying to reach. You know, you're not going to market and work on a project that targets people that live in the South and try to sell that to people that live in the North. It's not going to work. They're not going to care. And so you need to understand, and the same thing with cultures in other countries, you need to be careful with a brand name, for example, and on the project you're working on, because your company may say, all right, well, we've gone global and now we're going into this country. Well, now you need to do your research and make sure that what you are trying to project and market to this other country, you need to make sure that your brand name, that your company name is not offensive to that culture of people. You need to make sure that even the color combinations that maybe you're using on your product packaging is not offensive. And as silly as it may sound, it's very serious, because the last thing that you want to do is get through an entire project and then you're ready to launch the project and put it out there to the world and go global, and then you know come to find out you've just offended the culture of people in the way that, you know, that there was a word that translated that was offensive to them. And so these are very important things that has to go into your communication skills when you're dealing outside of your normal area of where you would normally market and focus on a project. And so it does take leadership to improve communication. And so within that leadership, hopefully as a project manager, you'll have somebody on the team that, you know, maybe if you have gone global, maybe you'll have at least one team member that's able to go and investigate or do a lot of additional research and find out how people in this particular community or country or culture is going to perceive the information. Now, in running effective meetings, you will determine if a meeting can be avoided. You know, are the meetings that you're calling necessary? Or can it be communicated in another manner? And again, with a lot of the project management software that's out there, a lot of times you can just send a mass message or tailor a message to certain people within that group and your team, and then maybe you avoid a meeting. You need to be able to define the purpose and intended outcome of the meeting. And again, you know, is this going to be a meeting where you need to have everybody in there? Do you need to have the graphic designer? Do you need to have all these different people in that meeting because it's an important aspect of the project? So you need to think and understand about the purpose and what you intend to achieve by that meeting. So maybe you will only need half of your team, or maybe you want everyone in there so that everyone can grasp the idea, you know, and where you are on the project. But again, you just need to evaluate that. And then you'll need to determine you have to determine who should attend the meeting. I jumped ahead of myself. And then you will provide an agenda to the participants before the meeting. So you always want to make sure that you give an overview of what's going to be talked about in the meeting, maybe which departments and team members are going to be included in the meeting. And that is an important form of communication and running an effective meeting. Also, it's advisable to prepare handouts and potentially visual aids to make logistical arrangements ahead of time. So don't just assume that the same conference room that you're meeting in all the time is going to always be available, especially if you have other people in the company that use it. Make sure that, you know, there's just like a lot of areas that have to be evaluated in order to run an effective meeting. And so you want to run the meeting as professionally as possible. That doesn't mean that you can't, you know, have humor in your meeting. You know, you need just to know, like, you can laugh and have a good time, but you need to know, and the project manager needs to know when to bring the meeting back around and keep it on going. And you have to respect everyone's time in the meeting, or you're going to start losing the respect and the focus of your team. So be mindful and respectful of the time of everyone involved. And this is where you'll also set the ground rules for the meeting. And so this is where you could tell the team that, this is what we're going, try to accomplish. And yes, you can keep it lighthearted, because you don't want every single meeting to be completely strict to where people start dreading coming in. But again, you do need to have set ground rules, and this is where you will effectively communicate that so that you run a smooth meeting. And then hopefully you'll be building relationships. The relationships with your team members are important, because maybe your team members will continually change throughout the time period, but then other times the team members may be the same. And so again, you want to be able to build relationships even with the stakeholders. You never know if the stakeholder will come back and want another project done. So using email, instant messaging, texting, and collaborative tools effectively. I touched on this just a little bit earlier. You will make sure that email, instant messaging, texting, and collaborative tools are an appropriate medium for what you want to communicate. You may not use all of these formats, and again, you'll have to decide based on the people. Again, if you have a team that is not all in the same area as you, and again, depending on if the team has been given company cell phones where they have unlimited texting, you need to be aware of that. Don't just assume because you have unlimited texting that everybody does. And not to mention, if you have a team that is overseas, you have to be mindful of international rates that your team may incur, and so you need to watch that, and be sure to send information to the right people. Again, with the use of a lot of the project management software that's out there, you have the ability to select the people that you plan to communicate the progress of the project to. And sometimes it will be selecting all of the recipients. Other times it'll be selecting just few. As a professor, I do this all the time. I'm able to select all of my students and send out a mass message to everyone, or I can select certain students to send messages to and then tailor according to what I need to relay to the student. And so even as a professor, I'm still a project manager. You'll also use meaningful subject lines and limit the content of emails to one main subject and be as clear and concise as possible. If I refer to my emails, mine are not always just one subject, because a lot of times I will try to touch on different ones just so I'm not sending out 5 different emails within the same day. But really, when you're running a project, you want to give an overview, and this is different than like if you had a meeting with your team and you wanted to do a follow-up email to the team. There in an instance like that, you would do an overview of what you discussed in the meeting. You want to be clear and concise, but sometimes if you have your meeting minutes, they may not be short meeting minutes, but you still need to be able to communicate and relay that information to the entire team. So sometimes your emails may be short, other times they may have more information. And be sure to authorize the right people to share and edit your collaborative documents. Sometimes teams will use like Google Docs, for example, and a lot of people have the ability to share documents in the Google Docs. Everyone needs to be clear on the team on who can share and maybe at what time they can share. You don't want to have a team of 6 people for example, and then having 4 people constantly uploading documents and nobody knowing that what's there, that causes a lot of confusion. And if you've authorized somebody to edit your own documents and send out updates, you need to make sure that you trust them enough that they're going to be relaying the right amount of information. Because unfortunately, once something is sent out, then it's there and you can't get it back. And so if something was relayed incorrectly, or if a wrong date was put into the communication, for example, it could cause a huge problem, and then you're back to your problem solving skills and trying to work on fixing that communication problem. Some sample collaborative tools that are out on the market. There's a SharePoint portal where it allows users to create custom websites to access documents and applications stored on shared devices. Google Docs allows users to create, share, and edit documents, spreadsheets, and presentations online. And I will say that, again, since I borrowed this presentation from this Information Technology Project Management book that was already created, I have noticed certain typos throughout the presentation, which are kind of bugging me right now, but I move on. And using templates for project communications. Templates are great. A lot of times you can use a Word document, or find an Excel template that everyone can use to work together so that everyone's information that's being shared is uniform. The worst thing you can do is have everybody using a different format, and then it ends up slowing you down on the project because you can't see, maybe some people have the date in the, at the very top left, and then other people have it at the bottom right or something like that. And so using templates that everyone can use so it is uniform helps for everybody to look at the document. Okay, I can see this is clearly, I can see the timeline, I can see where we're going, and it's all uniform, and you know where to look on that document. And if it's different, it ends up being, a problem. We also want to provide examples and templates for project communications because it does save time and it saves money. Organizations can create their own templates, use some provided by outside organizations, or use samples from textbooks. Again, Word has, and even I think Google Docs, they have different templates that can be used for these type of projects, or you can just create your own and share it. You'll recall that research shows that companies that excel in project management make effective use of their templates. And as I explained in the previous slide, it's because you want to keep it uniform and you want it to have a certain look and feel. And again, the last thing you want is where people getting all these different documents in different formats and you don't know where to look, and it really does interfere. So if anything, make sure you're using templates so that everybody can be following the right format. In this figure 10.3, it's a sample template for project description, and they've got it as Project X. And I see description is misspelled here. But anyway, on the project, you have your objective, you have your scope, your assumptions, your cost, and your schedule. The objective here is just where you describe the objective of the project in 1 or 2 sentences. You focus on the business benefits of doing the project. Your scope is what I mentioned earlier. It's just where you briefly describe the scope of the project, what business functions are involved, and what are the main products the project will produce. Your assumptions is where you summarize the most critical assumptions for the project. The cost, obviously, is your price, and this is the total, you'll provide the total estimated cost of the project, and if desired, you can list the total cost each year. On the schedule, you provide a summary information from the project's Gantt chart as shown below. Focus on the summary tasks and milestones. And this is an example, as it says, of a Gantt chart, which a lot of the project management software that's out on the market follows the same process, but you see where you have the start of a project, you've got maybe 3 main tasks, and then 3 different deliverables, and then the end of your project. And then normally across the top of your timeline, you have the months and you'll have dates. On this example, it just shows you that the project starts on June 1st, and then from September, the beginning of September, all the way to almost the end of October is the main task, and then there's a deliverable that they've got moved in there on July 6th. And actually looking at this chart, the dates don't match at the top of the column, so I don't know what they did there, because those little diamond shapes are really not in the correct place according to that top bar. So I apologize for that. But just to get an overall idea, you see how this particular project, the main task will normally go about 2 months. The second main task is 3 months because it's like the middle of October to the middle of January, and then your final task goes from almost to maybe probably about the second week of January, almost until the end of March, and then you have your projected end date on the project and where you hopefully have finished it on time. And then here, a sample template for monthly progress report. We have accomplishments for the month of January, or the appropriate month, where you'll describe the most important accomplishments relate to the project's Gantt chart. You describe other important accomplishments, and you put 1 bullet for each. If any issues are resolved from the previous month, list them as accomplishments because you technically accomplished those goals. Then for the next month or that follows, you'll describe the most important items to be accomplished in the next month, what you plan to get accomplished. Again, you relate to the project's Gantt chart. Then you'll describe other important items to accomplish, 1 bullet for each of those. And then in the third section, we have issues. You'll briefly list important issues that surfaced or are still important. Managers hate surprises and want to help the project succeed, so be sure to list the issues. And then it says on the 4th section for project changes, where that's the date and description. List any approved or requested changes to the project, include the date of the change, and a brief description. Again, I apologize for typos. On here, final project documentation items, we have several on the process. So we've got the project description. You'll communicate the project proposal and the backup data, and this is to request for proposal, the statement of work, proposal correspondence, and so on. Then you have your original and revised contract information and client acceptance documents, and hopefully your clients will have accepted and signed off so you can move forward. A lot of times if they don't sign off, then your project stalls. We don't want that. And then we have original and revised project plans and schedules. You've got your WBS, your Gantt charts, and your network diagrams, your cost estimates, communications management plan, etc., whatever you have included there. Your design documents, your final project report, your deliverables as appropriate as they come about. Any audit reports that you may have. You always will end a project with lessons learned. You always want to end that way because you want to stay, like I mentioned earlier with when I worked with the Turnpike and we talked with the patrons and found out all those different studies that needed to be done. When you learn that lesson, you make sure that all future projects incorporate those additions to the project. And then finally, you have copies of all the status reports, your meeting minutes, your change notices, and other written and electronic communications. And in your lessons learned report, the project manager and project team members should each prepare a lessons learned report. This is how you communicate what happened throughout the entire project, anything good or bad, and what you don't want to repeat or happen, or what you want to prepare for if something terrible happened throughout the project. And it'll include a reflective statement that documents important things an individual learned from working on the project. The project manager often combines information from all of the lessons learned reports into a project summary report. It is also important to organize and prepare project archives. Your project archives are a complete set of organized project records that provide an accurate history of the project. And the archives can provide valuable information for future projects. Again, this is where you go back and you can review and you learn from what you went through on that project. And you look at the things that went well and the things that went bad, and then make adjustments so that hopefully, I don't know that any project really goes perfect, but as close to as possible anyway. For project websites, website actually is supposed to be one word. Many project teams create a project website to store important product documents and other information. And this is where you can actually, now with cloud servers, because as you can see, the copyright of this presentation was 2 years ago at least. So now a lot of companies use a cloud server. So a lot of this, and again with Google Docs, so you may not be sharing or storing information on a website. You may be sharing and storing information on some places, Open Office somewhere, or in Google Docs, or somewhere on a cloud server, or there may be a place in your project management software where you would store important documents. But even so, I just say as a word of caution, even with the popularity, of cloud servers and document storage, I always say it's a good idea to, keep the information in-house, even if you can put it on a thumb drive and lock it away somewhere, just keep it, or, even keep printout copies, because sometimes, and a lot of times our technical devices can become corrupt over time for one reason or another. And the last thing you want to do is, put a thumb drive in or use an external hard drive and find that the information has been corrupted, or because technology changes over time that you no longer can read a particular document because maybe an image format is changed. I remember, excuse me, and then going back over 20 years ago, we used to use TIFF images, which is the file extension is a .tiff or TFF, and the TIFF image was really popular. And nowadays we use more JPEG or PNG file format for an image. And so again, this is where, even though we have the capability for digital project storage and information storage, it's always a good idea to have printouts too, just so you can always reference it later, because you just never really know if something's going to change, and something you're using today, maybe in 5 years' time, technology could have changed so much that you can't read that document anymore, and that's pretty bad. And I've seen that happen. And so also with these project websites, you can create the site using various types of software, such as enterprise project management software, which I mentioned. The several project management tools can be used on multiple devices, so it's a great idea if you're using a project management software and you're able to communicate to your team, not only through their their laptop, if they can access it from their tablet or from their cell phone, because everybody has so many different types of technical devices, a really good project management software will be able to allow your team to access the information across these multiple devices. And if they can access it and read documents on their mobile phone, that just helps your project move along farther. And then at even given time, it's possible that your stakeholder, they can go in on their mobile phone and see, where the project is progressing, or the CEO of your company can see that information without, having to call in, and granted, if it's not going the way they expected, they're going to be calling the project manager, and you're going to have to let them know what's going on anyway. This image is just an example they provided of Basecamp. If you're not familiar with Basecamp, it's a good software to use, and I believe they still have an ability where you can actually use it for free, and you could go in and try it out. When I was going through project management and getting my PMP, we used all these different types of software, and Basecamp was one of the most popular ones we used at the time, but we were also forced to just use Microsoft Excel. And the theory behind that was that if you can create the same type of Gantt charts and different types of communication to your team, they looked at it as if, well, what if you didn't have this other stuff available? Can you create the same thing using an Excel spreadsheet? Well, yeah, you can. It'll take you a little bit longer until you get familiar with it, but you can still create your graphs and your charts, and you can still create everything you need, your timelines, and share it with your team. Whether or not that's the case today, with so much technology that has changed, again, since this was created in the past 2 years, you have a lot of options, but here they're showing how you can use your desktop, your mobile phones, your in the different types of mobile phones, and your tablets, so it's not proprietary to only one type of operating system. And so when you go and you look for a project management software that's out there for your team to use, hopefully it'll be one that you can use it on different devices. And being that Android and Apple are the main drivers in your operating system, and then and most computers, again, you've got your Apple operating system on a computer, but you have Windows. And so when you have a program that your entire team can use across all these different operating systems, that's going to be your best way of communicating, because you want to make sure that it's running on all of them. The worst thing that can happen is that you have, half your team is on one operating system, and then it come to find out they can't see it because the file format and everything is wrong. So that's one good thing, and again, that's part of your communication. And using the software to assist in project communications, again, there are many software tools to aid in project communications. And today, many people telecommute or work remotely, at least part-time. And again, this also would include anybody on your team that is working internationally or in a different state and time zone than the rest of your team. Project management software includes new capabilities to enhance virtual communications. While technology can aid in the communications process, it is not the most important. Far more important is improving an organization's ability to communicate, which often involves a cultural change. And so what we went over here, the summary, the goal of project communications management is to ensure timely and appropriate generation, collection, dissemination, storage, and disposition of project information. The main process includes plan communications management, and manage communications, and control communications. So that ends this very long lecture on project communications. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Okay, so